Dr. Julian Lewis.
Mr. Speaker, honourable members are being asked to back airstrikes against Daesh to show solidarity with our French and American friends. Yet a gesture of solidarity, however sincerely meant, cannot be a substitute for hard-headed strategy. Most Defence Committee members probably intend to vote for such airstrikes, but I shall vote against airstrikes in the absence of credible ground forces as ineffective and potentially dangerous, just as I voted against the proposal to bomb Assad in 2013. Indeed, the fact that the British government wanted to bomb first one side and then the other in the same civil war in such a short space of time illustrates, to my mind, a vacuum at the heart of our strategy. At least we are now targeting our deadly Islamist enemies rather than trying to bring down yet another dictator with the same likely results as in Iraq and in Libya. Daesh must indeed be driven out of its territory militarily, but this can be done only by a credible force which is ready and able to do the fighting on the ground. So who will supply this force, without which airstrikes cannot prevail? The failure of the ineptly named Arab Spring in so many countries shows the two most likely outcomes: a victory for authoritarian dictatorship on the one hand, or a victory for revolutionary Islamism on the other. Moderation and democracy have barely featured in the countries affected, and Syria seems to be no exception. I am sorry to say, genuinely sorry to say, that we face a choice between very nasty authoritarians and Islamist totalitarians. There is no third way. Our government, however, is in denial about this. It does concede that airstrikes must be in support of ground forces and has come up with a remarkable figure from the Joint Intelligence Committee of 70,000 so-called moderate fighters with whom we can supposedly coordinate our airstrikes. It is very doubtful, however, that were such an alliance successful, the territory freed from Daesh would cease to be under Islamist control. Yes, I think I heard the Honourable Lady first.
I thank the honourable member for giving way. Could he comment specifically upon the independent reports that indicate the Free Syrian Army are currently selling supplied weapons to Daesh in their own fight against Assad?
It is certainly true that there have been well-documented cases of such weapons ending up in the hands of Daesh, though I wouldn't wish to tar the entire Free Syrian Army with what some of its factions might have done, or in fact have done, as the Honourable Lady rightly suggests. But in an attempt, to try and establish the facts about these 70,000, I have made inquiries of two people whose expert opinion I much admire. One is the writer and journalist Patrick Cockburn, who is one of Britain's leading commentators on Syria and Iraq, and who was one of the first to write about the threat from what was then called ISIS long before it captured Mosul. This is what he tells me, and I quote, "Unfortunately, the belief that there are 70,000 moderate opposition fighters on the ground in Syria is wishful thinking. The armed opposition is dominated by ISIS or Al-Qaeda type organizations. There are many small and highly fragmented groups of opposition fighters who do not like Assad or ISIS and could be described as non-extremist, but they are generally men from a single clan, tribe or village. They are often guns for hire, and they operate under license from the Al-Qaeda affiliate, the Al-Nusra Front, or its near equivalent, Ahrar al-Sham. Many of these groups, no, I'm sorry, I've promised over there. Many of these groups seek to present a moderate face abroad, but remain violently sectarian and intolerant inside Syria. I promise the Honourable Gentleman.
The Honourable Gentleman for giving way. But does he not agree with me that it's a ridiculous situation? On the one hand, the government praises the Kurds. On the other hand, the government's ally Turkey is attacking the Kurds. How ridiculous can you get than that?
I thank him for that contribution. It's not only ridiculous, it's highly dangerous. And I will insert at this point something I was going to leave out. I would just say in passing, to have separate conflicts going on within the same battle space without reaching a proper agreement can lead us into all sorts of nasty confrontations, the worst of which would be if we ended up eyeball to eyeball with the Russians when they and we share the same common enemy in ISIL-Daesh. The second expert I consulted was our former ambassador to Syria, Peter Ford. And this is how he describes the Free Syrian Army. He calls it a ragbag of 58 factions at the last count, united mainly by a desire to use the FSA appellation in order to secure Gulf, Turkish and Western funding. He goes on to say that most of the factions, which are extremely locally based, have no interest whatsoever in being drawn into battles against groups which basically share their sectarian agenda hundreds of miles away in areas with which they're unfamiliar. So, Mr. Speaker, instead of having dodgy dossiers, we now have bogus battalions of moderate fighters. Now, I wish to continue as follows. Once Daesh has been driven out, if eventually we get an overall military strategy together, which adding a few bombing raids does not comprise, once it has been driven out, as it must be driven out, there arises the question of the occupying power. Because there will have to be an occupying power remaining in control for many years to come if other Islamists are not going to take over from Daesh. That occupying force must be a Muslim one, and only the Syrian government army is likely to provide it. Indeed, as the Prime Minister himself acknowledged in the Commons on 26th of November, and I quote, "In time, the best ground troops should be the Syrian army." So, to bring matters to a close, airstrikes alone are a dangerous diversion and distraction. What is needed is a grand military alliance involving not only the West, but Russia and, yes, its Syrian government clients too. I honestly think that my honourable friend, the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee, has had more than his fair share in this debate, and I'm going to make use of mine. We need to choose the lesser of two evils and abandon the fiction of a cosy third choice. There is a general consensus now that the decision to remove Saddam Hussein was a terrible mistake. But Saddam Hussein was every bit as much of a vicious dictator as we are told that Assad is. So ask yourself, when you're thinking about the hard choice that has to be faced tonight, ask yourself this. You may feel pious about it, looking back on the wrong decision that was made about Saddam Hussein, but a very similar decision confronts us tonight. It is a question of choosing the lesser of two evils, not fooling ourselves that there's a cosy third option which in reality is a fantasy.